Some betrayals cut so deep they carve out a new person entirely, and that person knows exactly how to make the betrayer bleed. The rain hammered against my apartment window like angry fists, each drop a reminder of the storm that had been brewing inside me for 3 months. I sat in the darkness, my phone glowing in my trembling hands, the voice memo that changed everything still echoing in my mind. 27 seconds. That's all it took to shatter 5 years of my life and birth something darker, something hungrier for justice. My reflection stared back at me from the black window, hollow eyes, bruised throat barely visible in the dim light, and a smile that would have terrified me just hours ago. But I wasn't the same woman who had fallen asleep next to him last night. That woman was naive, broken, desperate for love. This woman had a plan. The engagement ring sat on the coffee table like a discarded lie, its diamond catching the occasional flash of lightning. Tomorrow he would wake up to find me gone. But that would only be the beginning. Because what he said about me in that voice memo, what he really thought of me, what he'd been telling his sister behind my back, that required something far more devastating than just disappearing. I picked up my laptop and began to type. The first email would go out at exactly 9 a.m. The second at noon. By evening, everyone would know who Blake Hernandez really was. And by the time I was finished, he would understand that some women don't just break. They become unbreakable and infinitely more dangerous. The thunder rolled overhead as I smiled into the darkness. He had no idea what was coming. Before we continue, please write in the comment which country you are watching this video. We love knowing where our global family is tuning in from. And if this is your first time on this channel, please subscribe. Your support helps us bring even more epic revenge tales of life. Enjoy listening. 6 months earlier, I thought I was living in a fairy tale. You're going to love this place, Arya, Blake said, his arm wrapped around my waist as we stood in the doorway of what would become our shared apartment on Riverside Drive. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, painting everything in golden light. Our first real home together. I leaned into his warmth, breathing in his familiar cologne, sandalwood and something distinctly him. After 3 years of long-distance dating while he finished his MBA at Columbia, we were finally going to be in the same city. The same home. It's perfect, I whispered, and I meant it. The hardwood floors gleamed, the kitchen had granite countertops that reflected the light beautifully, and the bedroom had a view of the Hudson River that took my breath away. Blake spun me around, his green eyes sparkling with the same excitement I felt bubbling in my chest. Perfect for my perfect girl, he said, pressing his forehead against mine. I can't believe we're finally doing this. Neither could I. After years of video calls, weekend visits, and counting down the days until we could be together, it felt surreal to be standing in our apartment. Our space. Our future. The first month was everything I had dreamed it would be. Blake would surprise me with coffee in bed, his dark hair still messy from sleep, that crooked smile that had made me fall for him in college spreading across his face. We'd cook dinner together, his hands guiding mine as he taught me to make his grandmother's pasta sauce. We'd fall asleep tangled together on the couch while watching old movies, and I'd wake up with his jacket draped over my shoulders. I love you, Arya Sebastian, he'd whisper into my hair during those quiet moments, and my heart would flutter like it was the first time he'd ever said it. But fairy tales, I learned, have a way of revealing their true nature when you're not paying attention. The changes started small. So small I convinced myself I was imagining them. You're wearing that to dinner? Blake asked one evening as I emerged from the bedroom in a sundress I'd always loved, yellow with tiny white flowers, something that made me feel bright and happy. I looked down at myself, suddenly self-conscious. What's wrong with it? Nothing's wrong, he said quickly, but his eyes lingered on the dress with something that looked like disappointment. It's just, we're going to Meridian. It's a nice place. Maybe something a little more sophisticated. I changed into a black cocktail dress, the kind that made me feel like I was playing dress-up in someone else's life. But Blake's face lit up when he saw me, and he pulled me close for a kiss that tasted like approval. There's my beautiful fiancé, he murmured against my lips, and the words still sent shivers through me. He'd proposed just 2 weeks after we'd moved in together, on the roof of our building under a canopy of stars. The ring was everything I'd dreamed of, a classic solitaire that caught the light and threw rainbows across the walls. At dinner he ordered for both of us without asking what I wanted. When I mentioned it later, he laughed and said he was just trying to take care of me. You always take forever to decide anyway, he said, squeezing my hand across the table. I know what you like. But he'd ordered salmon and I hated salmon. I ate it anyway, smiling and nodding as he talked about his new job at the investment firm, about the clients he was impressing, about the future he was building for us. The comments about my appearance became more frequent. My hair was too long, then too short when I cut it. My makeup was too dramatic for day, too subtle for evening. The clothes I'd worn confidently for years suddenly seemed wrong through his eyes. Too casual, too formal, too bright, too boring. I'm just trying to help you put your best foot forward, he'd say when I'd get quiet after his suggestions. You're so beautiful, Arya. I want everyone to see what I see. But I was starting to wonder what exactly he saw when he looked at me. The first time he raised his voice, I was so shocked I actually stepped backward. Are you serious right now? He snapped, his face flushing red as he stared at the credit card statement in his hand. $200 at Target? What the hell did you even buy? Groceries, I said, my voice smaller than I intended. And some things for the apartment. Towels and... We already have towels, Arya. We don't need to waste money on things we don't need. He threw the statement on the counter and I flinched at the sound. I'm working my ass off to build something here and you're just throwing money away. I'm sorry, I said automatically, though I wasn't sure what I was apologizing for. I didn't think. That's the problem, he said, but his voice was softer now and he reached for my hands. You don't think about how these things affect us. Affect our future. His thumbs rubbed circles on my palms, and I felt myself relaxing despite the knot in my stomach. I'm not mad at you, baby. I'm just stressed about money. You understand, right? I nodded because I did understand. He was working long hours trying to prove himself at the firm. The pressure was getting to him. It wasn't really about the money, it was about the stress. But the next week when I bought groceries with cash from my own account, he still found something to criticize. The bread was the wrong brand. The milk was too expensive. I was being wasteful, careless, thoughtless. Maybe you should make a list before you go, he suggested, his arm around my shoulders as we put the groceries away. Plan out the meals for the week. That way you'll only buy what we actually need. So I made lists. Detailed, organized lists that accounted for every meal, every snack, every household item we might need. I showed them to Blake before I went shopping and he'd nod approvingly and kiss my forehead. See? You're getting so much better at this, he'd say, and the praise would warm me from the inside out. But even with the lists there was always something wrong. I bought the wrong brand of pasta sauce, not the one his grandmother used. I forgot to get the specific type of coffee he liked. I picked up bananas that were too ripe, too green, too expensive. It's like you're not even trying, he said one evening after I'd apparently bought the wrong kind of cheese for the lasagna he wanted to make. I ask for one simple thing and you can't even get that right. The words hit me like a slap and I felt tears prick at my eyes. I am trying, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm trying so hard, Blake. His expression softened immediately and he pulled me into his arms. Hey, I'm sorry, he murmured into my hair. I didn't mean that. I'm just tired and I took it out on you. That's not fair. I melted into his embrace, relief flooding through me. This was the Blake I'd fallen in love with, gentle, apologetic, caring. The other Blake, the one who snapped and criticized and made me feel small, that wasn't really him. That was just stress, just the pressure of his new job, just the adjustment period of living together. I love you, he whispered, and I whispered it back, meaning it with every fiber of my being. But as the weeks passed, the gentle Blake appeared less and less frequently. The other Blake, the one who found fault with everything I did, who made me second-guess every decision, who looked at me like I was a disappointment he was trying to fix, became the norm. I started walking on eggshells, analyzing every word before I spoke, every action before I took it. Would this make him angry? Would this disappoint him? Was I being thoughtless again, careless again, not good enough again? My friends started commenting on how quiet I'd become when we went out. You okay, Arya? My best friend Luna asked one night when we met for drinks. You seem different. I'm fine, I said automatically, the response I'd perfected over the past few months. Just tired from work. But Luna's dark eyes studied my face with the intensity of someone who'd known me since college. Are you happy? With Blake, I mean. With the engagement. The question caught me off guard and for a moment I didn't know how to answer. Was I happy? I loved Blake. I was going to marry him. We were building a life together. Of course I was happy. Yes, I said, but the word felt strange in my mouth. Of course I'm happy. Why would you ask that? Luna shrugged, but her expression remained concerned. You just seem smaller lately. Like you're trying to take up less space. Her words haunted me for days. Was I smaller? Was I trying to take up less space? I found myself studying my reflection in the mirror, looking for signs of the person I used to be. The woman who'd graduated summa cum laude from NYU, who'd landed a job at a prestigious marketing firm, who'd once been confident enough to approach Blake at a college party and ask him to dance. Where had she gone? The answer came to me slowly in pieces like a puzzle I didn't want to solve. She'd been disappearing bit by bit, criticism by criticism, correction by correction. Every time Blake told me I was wrong, I became a little less sure of myself. Every time he fixed something I'd done, I became a little more dependent on his approval. But I pushed the thought away. This was normal, wasn't it? Relationships required compromise, adjustment, growth. Blake was helping me become a better version of myself. More organized, more thoughtful, more considerate of our shared future. The bruises started 3 months before the voice memo that would change everything. The first one was an accident. At least that's what I told myself. We were arguing about something trivial, something I can't even remember now, and I turned to walk away. Blake grabbed my wrist to stop me, his fingers digging into my skin with a desperation that surprised us both. Don't walk away from me when I'm talking to you, he said, his voice low and dangerous in a way I'd never heard before. I looked down at his hand on my wrist, at the white marks his fingers were leaving on my skin, and something cold settled in my stomach. You're hurting me, I said quietly. He released me immediately, his face cycling through shock, guilt, and something that might have been fear. God, Arya, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to, I just... He ran his hands through his hair, and when he looked at me again, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. I'm so sorry. I would never hurt you. You know that, right? I nodded because I did know that. Blake loved me. He would never hurt me on purpose. It was an accident, a moment of frustration that got out of hand. But the bruises on my wrist told a different story. 5 small dark marks that bloomed purple and yellow over the next few days. I covered them with long sleeves and bracelets, and when Blake saw me doing it, his face crumpled with guilt. I hate myself for that, he said, pulling me into his arms. I hate that I hurt you even accidentally. It will never happen again, I promise. And I believed him. Because the alternative, that the man I loved, the man I was going to marry, had hurt me on purpose, was too terrible to consider. But promises, I learned, are easier to make than to keep. The second time he said I'd provoked him. I'd been nagging him about helping with the dishes, and when I followed him into the living room to continue the conversation, he spun around so quickly that his elbow caught me in the ribs. Maybe if you didn't follow me around like a lost puppy, these things wouldn't happen, he said, but his voice was gentle, almost sad. I need space to breathe, Arya. When you crowd me like that, I get claustrophobic. So I learned to give him space. I learned to let arguments die rather than follow him when he walked away. I learned to swallow my words, to bite my tongue, to make myself smaller and quieter and less likely to provoke him. The third time there was no excuse. No accident, no provocation, no explanation that made sense. I'd simply disagreed with him about something, whether to go to his company's holiday party or spend the evening with my family, and he'd backhanded me across the face so quickly I didn't see it coming. The sound echoed through our apartment like a gunshot, and we both froze, staring at each other in shock. My cheek burned and I could taste blood where my teeth had cut my lip. Arya, he breathed, reaching for me, but I stepped back instinctively. Don't, I said, my voice shaking. Don't touch me. Baby, please, I didn't mean. You hit me. The words felt surreal coming out of my mouth. You hit me, Blake. His face crumpled and he sank onto the couch like his legs couldn't support him anymore. I know, he whispered. I know, and I hate myself for it. I don't know what's wrong with me. The stress at work, the pressure, it's making me crazy. He looked up at me with those green eyes I'd once thought were beautiful, and now they were filled with tears and desperation and something that looked like genuine remorse. I'll get help, he said. I'll talk to someone, figure out how to manage the stress better. This isn't who I am, Arya. You know this isn't who I am. And I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to believe him. Because if this wasn't who he was, then maybe we could fix it. Maybe we could go back to being the couple who cooked dinner together and fell asleep watching movies and whispered, I love you in the dark. Okay, I said finally, and his face flooded with relief. Okay. Get help, I said. Talk to someone. And if you ever hit me again. I won't, he said quickly. I swear to you, Arya, I will never lay a hand on you again. But even as he said it, even as I nodded and let him pull me into his arms, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that promises from men who hit the women they claim to love aren't worth the breath they're spoken with. I should have listened to that voice. I should have packed my bags that night and never looked back. That I stayed. I stayed because I loved him. I stayed because I believed he could change. I stayed because leaving felt like admitting that the last 5 years of my life had been a lie, and I wasn't ready to face that truth. But the truth has a way of revealing itself whether you're ready or not. And 3 months later, it would arrive in the form of a voice memo that Blake never meant for me to hear. The night that changed everything started like any other. Blake was working late again, or at least that's what he told me. I'd stopped asking too many questions about his schedule months ago, after he'd snapped at me for being clingy and suspicious. I was curled up on our couch, a cup of chamomile tea growing cold on the coffee table beside me, trying to focus on the book in my lap. But the words kept blurring together, my mind wandering to the conversation we'd had that morning. I might be late tonight, Blake had said, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. The morning light caught the sharp line of his jaw, and for a moment he looked like the man I'd fallen in love with in college. Big presentation tomorrow. The team wants to run through it one more time. Okay, I'd said, because that's what I always said now. I'll keep dinner warm for you. He'd kissed my forehead, a brief, distracted press of lips that felt more like habit than affection. Don't wait up. This could go really late. So I hadn't waited up. I'd eaten dinner alone, cleaned the kitchen alone, and settled in with my book alone. The silence in our apartment felt heavy, oppressive in a way it never used to. There was a time when I'd enjoyed quiet evenings by myself, but now they just reminded me of how isolated I'd become. My phone buzzed on the cushion beside me, and I glanced at it expecting to see a text from Blake. Instead, it was a notification for a voice memo. From Blake. My heart did a little skip of happiness. Maybe he was thinking of me after all. Maybe he'd sent me a sweet message to brighten my evening, the way he used to when we were long distance. I picked up the phone and hit play without really looking at the details. Blake's voice filled the quiet apartment, but something was wrong immediately. He sounded different, relaxed in a way he never was with me anymore, his voice carrying the easy warmth I remembered from our early days together. Hey Meredith, he said, and my blood turned to ice. Meredith, his sister. This wasn't meant for me. I should have stopped listening. Should have hung up immediately and pretended I'd never heard it. But something in his tone, something casual and unguarded, kept me frozen in place. So I've been thinking about what you said last week, Blake continued, and I could hear the sound of traffic in the background. He was walking somewhere, probably from his office to whatever bar he was meeting his co-workers at. About Arya, I mean. My name on his lips made my stomach clench. What had Meredith said about me? What had they been discussing? You're right, Blake said, and his voice carried a note of resignation that made my hands start to shake. She's not who I thought she was when I proposed. Hell, she's not who I thought she was when we moved in together. The book slipped from my numb fingers and hit the floor with a soft thud. I mean, don't get me wrong, Blake continued, oblivious to the fact that his words were tearing my world apart. She's sweet. He tries so hard to please me, it's almost pathetic sometimes. But that's just it, she's pathetic. She has no backbone, no opinions of her own anymore. It's like living with a ghost. A ghost. He thought I was a ghost. Remember how she used to be in college? Blake's voice took on a wistful quality that made me want to scream. She was so confident, so sure of herself. She'd argue with professors, debate politics at parties, call me out when I was being an ass. I loved that about her. Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and silent. I wanted to turn off the phone to stop this torture, but I couldn't move. I had to hear it all. But now. God, Mare, she asks my permission for everything. What to wear, what to eat, what to watch on TV. She's turned herself into this perfect little housewife who never disagrees with me about anything. And the worst part is, I think I did that to her. There was a pause and I could hear him sigh heavily. I know I've been difficult lately. The stress at work, the pressure to succeed, I've been taking it out on her and she just takes it. She apologizes for things that aren't her fault, walks on eggshells around me, flinches when I move too fast. Christ, I made her flinch, Meredith. What kind of man does that make me? The kind who hits women, I thought bitterly. The kind who breaks them down piece by piece until they're shadows of who they used to be. But here's the thing, Blake continued, and his voice hardened in a way that made my blood run cold. I can't respect someone who won't stand up for themselves. I can't love someone who's so desperate for my approval that they'll change everything about themselves to get it. It's disgusting, honestly. Disgusting. I was disgusting to him. So yeah, you're right. I need to end it. I just don't know how. She's so fragile now, so dependent on me. If I break up with her, she'll probably fall apart completely. And then there's the apartment, the ring, all the plans we've made. He trailed off, and I could hear the sound of a door opening, voices in the background. Look, I'm at Murphy's now. We'll talk more about this later, okay? But you're right. I can't marry someone I don't respect. I just need to figure out how to let her down easy. The voice memo ended with a soft beep that seemed to echo in the sudden silence of our apartment. I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone, trying to process what I'd just heard. 27 seconds. That's all it had taken to destroy 5 years of my life, to reveal the truth I'd been too blind or too desperate to see. Blake didn't love me. He didn't even respect me. I was pathetic to him, disgusting, a ghost of the woman I used to be. And he was planning to leave me. Not because he'd realized he was abusive, not because he wanted to get help, but because I wasn't strong enough for him anymore. Because I'd let him break me, and now he was disgusted by the broken pieces. The rage that filled me then was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It started as a cold knot in my stomach and spread outward like poison, burning through my veins until every cell in my body was screaming for justice. He'd done this to me. He'd systematically torn down my confidence, my independence, my sense of self, until I was exactly what he'd described, a pathetic ghost who lived for his approval. And now he had the audacity to be disgusted by his own handiwork? I thought about all the times I'd apologized for things that weren't my fault. All the times I'd changed my clothes because he didn't like them. All the times I'd swallowed my words, my opinions, my very self because I was so desperate to keep him happy. I thought about the bruises I'd hidden, the excuses I'd made, the friends I'd stopped seeing because Blake didn't like them. I thought about the woman I used to be, confident, opinionated, strong, and how completely she'd disappeared. But she wasn't gone, I realized. She was just buried under months of manipulation and abuse. And now, listening to Blake's casual cruelty, I could feel her clawing her way back to the surface. My phone buzzed with a text from Blake. Working late. Don't wait up. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, okay. Love you. But as I hit send, I was already planning. Because Blake Hernandez had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated the woman he'd tried so hard to destroy. He thought I was weak, pathetic, broken beyond repair. He thought I'd fall apart when he left me, that I'd beg him to stay, that I'd blame myself for not being good enough. He had no idea that some women don't break, they transform. And the woman he'd created through months of psychological torture was about to show him exactly what she was capable of. I picked up my laptop and began to research. Blake's company, his coworkers, his clients. His social media accounts, his family, his friends. Every detail of the life he'd built, the reputation he was so proud of, the future he was planning without me. By the time he came home at 2 a.m. reeking of alcohol and barely able to walk straight, I was ready. Hey baby, he slurred, stumbling into the bedroom where I was pretending to sleep. Sorry I'm so late. You know how it is. I know exactly how it is, I murmured into my pillow, but he was already passed out beside me, snoring loudly. I lay awake for the rest of the night, staring at the ceiling, perfecting my plan. By morning I had every detail mapped out. Every move calculated. Every consequence considered. Blake Hernandez thought he knew me. Thought he'd broken me down into something manageable and disposable. He was about to learn how wrong he was. I woke up before dawn, my body moving with a purpose I hadn't felt in months. Blake was still unconscious beside me, his face slack with sleep and alcohol, completely unaware that the woman lying next to him was no longer the broken creature he'd been planning to discard. The first step was the hardest. Leaving. Not because I would miss him, God no. But because walking away meant acknowledging that the last 5 years of my life had been built on a foundation of lies and manipulation. It meant admitting that I'd lost myself so completely that I'd become unrecognizable even to me. But as I moved quietly through our apartment, gathering the few things that were truly mine, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: clarity. I packed light. A suitcase with enough clothes for a week, my laptop, important documents, and the small jewelry box my grandmother had left me, the only thing in this apartment that Blake had never criticized or tried to change. Everything else could stay. The furniture we'd picked out together, the kitchen gadgets he'd insisted we needed, the engagement ring that had once represented my dreams, it was all tainted now, contaminated by the truth of what our relationship really was. I left the ring on his nightstand where he'd see it immediately upon waking. No note, no explanation. Just the diamond solitaire that had once made me feel chosen, special, loved. Now it looked like what it had always been: a beautiful lie. My hands were steady as I called a cab, my voice calm as I gave the driver the address of the extended stay hotel I'd booked online. I'd paid for a month in advance using the credit card Blake didn't know about, the one I'd opened secretly after he'd started monitoring our joint account so closely. The old Arya would have felt guilty about the deception. This Arya felt nothing but satisfaction. As the cab pulled away from Riverside Drive, I allowed myself one look back at the building that had been my prison for the past year. Blake was probably still sleeping off his hangover, blissfully unaware that his pathetic fiancé had just walked out of his life forever. But leaving was only the beginning. The hotel room was small but clean, with a view of the city that reminded me of possibilities rather than limitations. I set up my laptop on the small desk and began phase 2 of my plan: research. Blake Hernandez, 28, senior associate at Hartwell & Associates investment firm. Graduate of Columbia Business School. Son of Taylor and Linda Hernandez of Greenwich, Connecticut. Brother to Meredith Hernandez, a pediatric surgeon in Boston. I knew most of these facts already, but now I was looking at them through different eyes. Not as the loving fiancé who was proud of his accomplishments, but as someone who understood that reputation was everything to a man like Blake. His career, his social standing, his carefully cultivated image of success. These were the things he valued most. These were the things I was going to destroy. I started with his company. Hartwell & Associates prided itself on integrity, family values, and ethical business practices. Their website featured smiling photos of diverse employees, testimonials about work-life balance, and a prominent section about their zero-tolerance policy for harassment and domestic violence. How interesting. I spent the morning crafting emails. Not angry, emotional rants that could be dismissed as the ravings of a bitter ex-fiancé, but carefully worded, professional communications that painted a picture of a man whose private behavior was completely at odds with the company's stated values. The first email went to Blake's direct supervisor, a woman named Catherine Walsh, whose LinkedIn profile showed her posing with her husband and 2 young daughters at a charity run for domestic violence awareness. Dear Ms. Walsh, I hope this email finds you well. My name is Arya Sebastian, and until this morning I was engaged to your employee Blake Hernandez. I'm writing to inform you of some concerning behavior that I believe conflicts with Hartwell & Associates' stated commitment to ethical conduct and employee integrity. Over the past year, Mr. Hernandez has engaged in a pattern of psychological and physical abuse that has escalated significantly in recent months. I have documentation of these incidents, including photographs of injuries and recordings of threatening behavior. While I understand that personal matters don't always reflect on professional conduct, I felt it was important to bring this to your attention given the nature of Mr. Hernandez's role in client relations and his representation of your company's values. I am not seeking any specific action at this time, merely ensuring that you have all relevant information about an employee who regularly interacts with clients and colleagues. I trust you will handle this information with the discretion and seriousness it deserves. Sincerely, Arya Sebastian. I attached a single photograph, one I'd taken of the bruises on my wrist after the first accident. I told myself at the time that I was documenting it for my own peace of mind, never imagining I'd actually use it. But the old Arya had been smarter than I'd given her credit for. The second email went to the HR department, with copies to several senior partners whose email addresses I'd found on the company website. The third went to the client Blake had been bragging about landing, a family foundation that funded women's shelters. By noon, I'd sent 12 carefully crafted emails to various people in Blake's professional orbit. Not enough to seem like a coordinated attack, but enough to ensure that whispers would start circulating. Questions would be asked. His reputation would begin to crack. But I wasn't done. Not even close. Phase 3 involved social media, and this required a more delicate touch. Blake was active on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook, carefully curating an image of professional success and personal happiness. Photos of us at company events, vacation pictures from our trip to Napa last year, posts about his promotion and our engagement. I couldn't attack him directly. That would make me look unstable, vindictive. Instead, I began a subtle campaign of truth-telling that would slowly erode the perfect image he'd worked so hard to create. I started by updating my own social media profiles. Changed my relationship status from engaged to single. Removed Blake from my profile pictures. Posted a simple status update. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away. Within an hour, the comments started pouring in. Friends who'd noticed I'd seemed different lately. Family members who'd never quite warmed to Blake. College acquaintances who remembered the confident woman I used to be. "Are you okay, honey?" my cousin Emma wrote. "If you need anything, I'm here." "So proud of you for putting yourself first," commented my old roommate from NYU. "You deserve so much better." "About time," wrote Luna, and I could practically hear the relief in her voice even through the screen. I responded to each comment with grace and gratitude, never mentioning Blake by name, never airing dirty laundry in public. But the message was clear. I had left him, and the people who knew me best were relieved. The contrast would be stark when Blake's friends and family started asking questions. When they looked at my social media and saw the outpouring of support, the obvious relief of people who cared about me. When they started to wonder what they'd missed, what signs they'd ignored. By evening, my phone was buzzing constantly with calls and texts from people who'd seen my posts. I answered some, ignored others, and carefully crafted my responses to paint a picture of a woman who'd found the strength to leave a bad situation. "I'm okay," I told my sister when she called, her voice tight with worry. "I'm actually better than I've been in a long time." "What happened, Arya? You seemed so happy with him." "I thought I was," I said, and for the first time, I allowed a note of sadness to creep into my voice. But sometimes we mistake control for love. Sometimes we don't realize how small we've become until we remember what it feels like to breathe freely. My sister was quiet for a long moment. "Did he hurt you?" "Not in the ways that leave scars you can see," I said carefully. "But yes. He hurt me." "Oh honey. I'm so sorry. I should have seen." "No," I interrupted. "This isn't on you. This isn't on anyone but him. And now it's over." But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As night fell, I sat in my hotel room and waited. Blake would have found the ring by now. He'd have tried calling me, texting me, maybe even gone to my office looking for me. He'd be confused, then angry, then probably relieved that I'd made the breakup easy for him. He had no idea what was coming. My phone rang at 11:47 p.m. Blake's name flashed on the screen, and I let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was exactly what I expected. Confusion masquerading as concern, with an undertone of irritation that I dared to inconvenience him. "Arya, what the hell? I wake up and you're gone, your ring is on the nightstand and you won't answer your phone? Look, I know we've been having some problems lately, but this is crazy. Just call me back, okay? We can work this out. We always do. We always do." As if our working things out hadn't always meant me apologizing, me changing, me shrinking myself down to fit his expectations. I deleted the voicemail without listening to it again. The second call came 20 minutes later. This time I answered. "Arya, thank God. Where are you? Are you okay?" His voice was different now, higher, more frantic. The emails had probably started reaching their targets. "I'm fine, Blake," I said, my voice calm and steady. "Better than I've been in months, actually." "What's going on? Why did you leave? And why the hell are people from my office calling me asking about?" He stopped abruptly. "Asking about what?" I prompted sweetly. "You know what," he said, and now his voice carried the edge I knew so well. "What did you tell them, Arya?" I told them the truth. The silence stretched between us, heavy with implications. I could practically hear him calculating, trying to figure out how much damage I could do, how much I actually knew. "The truth?" he finally said, and he was trying for his old charming tone, the one that used to make me melt. "Come on, baby. You're upset, I get it. We've both been under a lot of stress lately. But don't you think you're being a little dramatic?" Dramatic. There was the word I'd been waiting for. The one he always used when I dared to have feelings he didn't approve of. Am I being dramatic, Blake? Or am I finally being honest? Honest about what? We had some fights, sure, but every couple. You hit me, I said quietly, and the words hung in the air like a blade. Another silence. Longer this time. That was an accident, he said finally. You know that was an accident. I would never. Which time? I interrupted. The first time when you grabbed my wrist so hard you left bruises? The second time when your elbow just happened to catch my ribs? Or the third time when you backhanded me across the face? I have pictures, Blake. Of the bruises. Time-stamped photos that show exactly when each incident occurred. I also have recordings. This was a lie, but he didn't know that. And the fear in his voice when he spoke again told me the bluff had worked. Recordings of what? Of you. Of the things you say to me when you think I'm too broken to fight back. Of the way you talk about me when you think I can't hear. Like the voice memo he'd accidentally sent me. But I wasn't ready to play that card yet. Look, Blake said, and now he was in full damage control mode. I know I haven't been perfect. The stress at work, the pressure, it's been making me crazy. But I love you, Arya. We can get through this. I'll get help. You'll what? Go to therapy? Promise to change? Tell me how sorry you are and how it'll never happen again. I laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to cut. I've heard this song before, Blake. I'm not interested in the encore. So what, you're just going to destroy my career over some relationship problems? That's insane, Arya. That's what? I asked when he trailed off. That's not who you are, he said finally, and his voice was softer now, almost pleading. You're not vindictive. You're not cruel. You're better than this. You're right, I said. The woman you've been living with for the past year isn't vindictive or cruel. She's pathetic and desperate and so broken down that she disgusts even the man who claims to love her. I heard his sharp intake of breath and knew he was remembering the voice memo, wondering if I'd somehow heard it. But here's the thing, Blake, I continued. That woman isn't who I really am. She's who you made me. And now that I remember who I actually am, I find that I'm very interested in making sure you face some consequences for what you've done. Arya, please. Good night, Blake. Oh, and don't bother trying to find me. I'm somewhere you'll never think to look. Somewhere safe where I can think clearly for the first time in months. I hung up before he could respond and immediately blocked his number. Then I opened my laptop and began phase 4. The next morning brought exactly what I'd hoped for. Chaos. I woke up to 17 missed calls from Blake's various phone numbers. His cell, his office line, even his parents' house phone. He'd clearly been desperate enough to involve his family, which meant the panic was setting in. But more importantly, my carefully planted seeds were beginning to sprout. The first sign came in the form of a LinkedIn notification. Blake had been tagged in a post by someone from his company. A group photo from a team-building event with the caption, "Celebrating our amazing colleagues who embody Hartwell's values every day." But Blake's face had been conspicuously cropped out of the image. Small, subtle, but telling. I made myself coffee in the hotel's tiny kitchenette and settled in to watch the show unfold. By 10 a.m., Blake had created a new phone number and was calling me from that. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to his increasingly frantic messages. Arya, I know you're getting these. Catherine Walsh called me into her office this morning. They're putting me on administrative leave pending an investigation. An investigation, Arya. Do you understand what this means for my career? I understood perfectly. It meant everything was going according to plan. The next message was angrier. This is insane. You can't just destroy someone's life because you're upset about a breakup. I have rights, Arya. I have a reputation to protect. The irony was delicious. Blake Hernandez, who had spent months systematically destroying my sense of self, was outraged that someone might damage his reputation. But the third message was different. His voice was smaller, more vulnerable, and for a moment he sounded like the man I'd fallen in love with in college. Please, Arya. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But this is going to ruin everything I've worked for. Can't we just talk? Can't we figure this out like adults? Like adults. As if hitting your fiancé was adult behavior. As if psychological abuse was a mature way to handle relationship stress. I deleted the messages and checked my email. The responses were better than I'd dared to hope. Catherine Walsh had written back personally, thanking me for bringing the matter to their attention and assuring me that Hartwell and Associates took such allegations very seriously. The HR department had sent a formal acknowledgement of my complaint and a request for any additional documentation I might have. But the most satisfying response came from the family foundation Blake had been courting. Their executive director, a woman named Dr. Sarah Martinez, had written a lengthy email expressing her shock and disappointment. She'd also mentioned that they would be re-evaluating their potential partnership with Mr. Hernandez and Hartwell and Associates in light of these serious allegations. Blake's golden client, the one he'd been bragging about for months, was slipping through his fingers. I spent the morning making more calls, reaching out to mutual friends and acquaintances with carefully crafted conversations that painted a picture without explicitly stating facts. "I just wanted you to know that Blake and I have ended our engagement," I told his college roommate Marcus, who'd always seemed like a decent guy. "I'm doing well, but I wanted to reach out because I know you two are close, and I didn't want you to be blindsided if he seems different lately." "Different how?" Marcus asked, concern evident in his voice. "I think he's been under a lot of pressure," I said carefully. "Work stress, maybe some other issues. He's been not himself. I just hope he gets the help he needs." It was masterful, really. I wasn't making accusations or sharing details, just expressing concern for Blake's well-being in a way that would make Marcus start paying closer attention to his friend's behavior. And when Blake inevitably started ranting about his crazy ex-fiancé, who was trying to ruin his life, Marcus would remember this conversation and wonder what he'd missed. I had similar conversations with 3 other mutual friends, each one carefully calibrated to plant seeds of doubt without crossing the line into obvious manipulation. By afternoon, the social media response was becoming impossible to ignore. My simple post about walking away had generated over 200 comments and shares, with friends and family members sharing their own stories of leaving toxic relationships. The outpouring of support was genuine and overwhelming, and it painted a stark contrast to Blake's online presence, which had gone completely silent. That silence was telling. Blake was usually active on social media, posting about work achievements, sharing articles about investment strategies, maintaining his carefully curated image of success. But today, nothing. He was probably too busy dealing with the fallout to worry about his online persona. Or maybe his lawyers had advised him to stay quiet. The thought made me smile. If Blake had already lawyered up, it meant he understood the seriousness of his situation. It meant he was scared. Good. My phone rang at 3 p.m. Unknown number, but I recognized the area code. Greenwich, Connecticut. Blake's parents. I answered on the 4th ring. "Aria, dear, it's Linda Hernandez." Blake's mother's voice was strained, carefully controlled in the way that suggested she was working very hard to remain polite. "I hope you don't mind me calling. Blake gave me your number." "Of course not, Mrs. Hernandez. How are you?" "Well, I've been better, to be honest. Blake told us about the situation. About your engagement ending." "Yes," I said simply. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way." He also mentioned that there might be some misunderstandings about what happened between you two. Some things that might affect his job. Misunderstandings. That was one way to put it. "I'm not sure what Blake told you," I said carefully, "but I haven't misunderstood anything. I've simply been honest about my experiences." There was a long pause. Linda Hernandez was a smart woman. I'd always liked her during our previous interactions. She'd raised 2 successful children and had been married to a prominent attorney for over 30 years. She knew how to read between the lines. "Aria," she said finally, her voice softer now, "did my son hurt you?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implications. I could lie, deflect, protect Blake's relationship with his family. The old Aria might have done exactly that. But the old Aria was gone. "Yes," I said quietly. "He did." I heard her sharp intake of breath, followed by a long silence. "I'm so sorry," she whispered finally. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea. He always spoke about you with such love." "I'm sure he did," I said, and I meant it. Blake probably did love me in his own twisted way. But love without respect, love that came with conditions and punishments, love that required me to disappear piece by piece, that wasn't really love at all. "What can I do?" Linda asked. "How can I help?" The question surprised me. I'd expected her to defend her son, to make excuses, to try to minimize what had happened. Instead, she was offering to help me. Just don't make excuses for him, I said. Don't let him convince you that this was my fault, or that I'm exaggerating, or that it was just stress from work. What he did to me he chose to do. And if he doesn't face real consequences, he'll do it to someone else. You're right, she said, and her voice was stronger now. You're absolutely right. I raised him better than this. We raised him better than this. After we hung up, I sat in my hotel room and felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Validation. Blake's own mother believed me. She wasn't making excuses or trying to protect him. She was holding him accountable. It was more than I dared to hope for. But the day wasn't over yet. At 6 p.m. my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Meet me at Café Luna on 42nd Street. 1 hour. Come alone. Meredith. Blake's sister. I stared at the message for a long time, weighing my options. Meeting with Meredith could be dangerous. She might be trying to help Blake, to convince me to back down, to find some way to minimize the damage I was causing. But it could also be an opportunity. Meredith was the one Blake had been talking to in that voice memo, the one who'd apparently agreed that he should leave me. She knew things about her brother that I didn't, had seen sides of him that he'd kept hidden from me. And if I was very careful, very smart, I might be able to turn Blake's own sister into an ally. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door. Café Luna was crowded with the after-work rush, the air thick with the scent of coffee and the low hum of conversation. I spotted Meredith immediately. She had Blake's green eyes and dark hair, but where his features had become sharp with cruelty over the past year, hers remained soft with what looked like genuine concern. She was sitting in a corner booth, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup like she was trying to warm herself from the inside out. When she saw me approaching, she stood up quickly, and I was surprised to see tears in her eyes. "Arya," she said, and her voice was thick with emotion. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." I slid into the booth across from her, studying her face carefully. "Your brother sent you, didn't he? To try to convince me to back down." Meredith's laugh was bitter. "Blake doesn't know I'm here. If he did, he'd probably never speak to me again." She took a shaky sip of her coffee. "I came because I owe you an apology. A huge one. This wasn't what I'd expected. I'd prepared for manipulation, for guilt trips, for attempts to make me feel sorry for Blake. I hadn't prepared for an apology." "For what?" I asked carefully. "For not speaking up sooner. For not seeing what was happening to you. For..." She paused, her eyes filling with fresh tears. "For encouraging him to leave you instead of encouraging him to get help." My blood ran cold. So she had been part of those conversations, had been advising Blake on his relationship. But her words suggested something different than what I'd assumed. "What do you mean?" I asked. Meredith set down her coffee cup with shaking hands. "Blake's been calling me for months, complaining about you. About how you'd changed, how you weren't the woman he fell in love with anymore. How you were clingy and needy and..." She swallowed hard. "And pathetic." Each word hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd already heard them in the voice memo. Hearing them repeated by his sister somehow made them worse. "At first I told him that relationships go through rough patches," Meredith continued. "That maybe you were just adjusting to living together, that he needed to be patient. But he kept calling, kept complaining, and eventually I started to believe him." She looked up at me then, and the guilt in her eyes was unmistakable. "I told him that if he was that unhappy, maybe he should end things. I said that life was too short to stay in a relationship that wasn't working. I thought, God, Arya, I thought you were just incompatible. I thought maybe you really had become someone different, someone he couldn't love anymore. But..." I prompted, sensing there was more. "But then I saw you at Mom and Dad's anniversary party last month. Do you remember?" I did remember. It had been a tense evening, with Blake criticizing everything from my dress to my conversation topics on the drive there. By the time we arrived, I'd been walking on eggshells, terrified of doing anything that might set him off. "You were so quiet," Meredith said. "So small. You barely spoke unless someone asked you a direct question, and even then you kept looking at Blake like you were asking for permission. And when he snapped at you for spilling wine on your dress..." "It was an accident," I said automatically, the old defense mechanism kicking in. "I know it was an accident," Meredith said firmly. "But the way he spoke to you, the way you flinched. Arya, I've never seen you flinch before. You used to be so confident, so sure of yourself. You'd give as good as you got in any argument, stand up for yourself, call people out when they were being unreasonable. But that night you looked terrified. She paused, wiping at her eyes with a napkin. I went home that night and couldn't stop thinking about it. About how different you seemed, how scared you looked. And I started remembering other things. How Blake would interrupt you when you were talking, how he'd correct you about things that didn't matter, how he'd make these little comments about your appearance or your opinions that seemed harmless but were actually cruel. The word hung between us, heavy with recognition. I called him the next day, Meredith continued. I told him I was worried about you, that maybe something else was going on. That maybe the reason you'd changed wasn't because you were incompatible, but because something was wrong in your relationship. What did he say? Meredith's face darkened. He got angry. Really angry. He said I didn't understand the situation, that I was only seeing one side of things. He said you were manipulative, that you played the victim to get sympathy, that you were trying to turn his own family against him. I felt a chill run down my spine. Even when confronted by his sister's concerns, Blake had doubled down, had painted me as the problem. But the more defensive he got, the more I started to see the truth, Meredith said. I'm a doctor, Arya. I see the signs of abuse in my patients' families all the time. I know what it looks like when someone is being systematically broken down. And I realized that's exactly what had happened to you. She reached across the table and touched my hand gently. I'm so sorry I didn't see it sooner. I'm sorry I didn't speak up when I should have. And I'm sorry I ever told him to leave you instead of telling him to get help for whatever was making him treat you that way. I stared at her for a long moment, processing what she just told me. Blake's own sister had recognized the signs of abuse, had tried to confront him about it, and he'd responded by painting me as manipulative and vindictive. There's something else, I said quietly. Something you should know. I pulled out my phone and played the voice memo Blake had accidentally sent me. Meredith's face went white as she listened to her brother's casual cruelty, his disgust at what he'd turned me into, his plans to leave me because I wasn't strong enough for him anymore. When it ended, she was crying openly. Oh my God, she whispered. Oh my God, Arya, I'm so sorry. I had no idea he was talking about you like that. When he called me last week, he made it sound like you two were just growing apart, like it was mutual incompatibility. He never told me he thought you were pathetic. But you did tell him he should leave me, I said, not accusingly, just stating a fact. Yes, she admitted. But not because I thought you were the problem. I told him that if he couldn't love and respect you the way you deserved, then he should let you go so you could find someone who would. I thought maybe if he left, you'd have a chance to heal, to become yourself again. I studied her face, looking for signs of deception, but all I saw was genuine remorse and anger. Anger at her brother for what he'd done, and at herself for not stopping it sooner. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because what you're doing, exposing him, making sure there are consequences, it's exactly what should happen. Blake has always been able to charm his way out of trouble, to convince people that his problems are someone else's fault. But this time he can't. This time there's evidence. There are witnesses. There's you refusing to be silenced. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. I want to help you, she said. I want to make sure he faces real consequences for what he's done. Not just losing his job, but understanding that his actions have destroyed lives. That he's become someone our parents didn't raise him to be. How? I asked. Meredith was quiet for a moment, then pulled out her own phone. Blake doesn't know this, but I've been recording our conversations for the past month. Ever since I started suspecting what was really going on. My heart started beating faster. Recording them? I'm a mandated reporter, she explained. When I suspect abuse, I have to document it. I started recording our calls as evidence in case something happened to you. In case you needed proof of what he was really like. She scrolled through her phone and showed me a list of audio files, each one dated and labeled with Blake's name. There are hours of recordings here, Arya. Blake talking about you, about your relationship, about the things he's done. He said things to me that he would never say in public, things that show exactly who he really is. I stared at the phone, hardly daring to believe what I was seeing. You'd be willing to share those? I'd be willing to do more than that, Meredith said firmly. I'd be willing to testify if it comes to that. To go on record about what I've observed, what I've heard. Blake is my brother and I love him, but what he's done to you is unforgivable. And if I don't speak up now, he'll do it to someone else." For the first time since I'd heard that voice memo, I felt tears prick at my eyes. But these weren't tears of pain or rage. They were tears of relief. I wasn't alone in this. Blake's own sister was willing to stand with me, to help me make sure he faced consequences for his actions. "There's something else," Meredith said quietly. "Something you should know about Blake's history." I looked up at her, waiting. "You weren't the first," she said, and her voice was barely above a whisper. "There was a girl in college, Rebecca. They dated for about a year and toward the end, she changed. Became quiet, withdrawn. She broke up with him suddenly, wouldn't tell anyone why. At the time, we all thought she was just being dramatic, that maybe she'd found someone else." My blood ran cold. "But now you think?" "Now I think Blake has been doing this for years," Meredith said. "I think he has a pattern of finding strong, confident women and systematically breaking them down until they're shadows of themselves. And then when he gets bored with what he's created, he discards them and moves on to someone new." The implications hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't Blake's first victim. There had been others before me, and if he wasn't stopped, there would be others after me. "I tried to find Rebecca," Meredith continued. "To reach out to her to see if she'd be willing to talk. But she's completely disappeared from social media, changed her name, moved across the country. It's like she's trying to erase every trace of who she used to be. Or like she was hiding from someone who had destroyed her so completely that she couldn't bear to be found." "We have to stop him," I said, and my voice was stronger than it had been in months. "We have to make sure he can't do this to anyone else." Meredith nodded. "I know. And I think I know how." She leaned forward, lowering her voice even though the cafe was loud enough that no one could overhear us. "Blake's company isn't just investigating him because of your complaint," she said. "There have been other complaints. Rumors about his behavior with female colleagues, questions about his conduct at company events. Your email was just the final piece of evidence they needed to take action." "How do you know that?" "Because I know someone who works there. A friend from medical school whose husband is a partner at Hartwell. She's been telling me about the whispers, the concerns that have been building for months. Blake thinks he's been subtle, but apparently he hasn't been as careful as he thought. This was better than I dared to hope. Blake wasn't just facing consequences for what he'd done to me, he was facing consequences for a pattern of behavior that had been building for months, maybe years." "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Keep doing what you're doing," Meredith said. "Keep telling the truth. Keep refusing to be silenced. And when the time comes, when they need witnesses, when they need evidence, be ready to stand up in court and tell your story." "And you'll stand with me?" "I'll stand with you," she said firmly. "Blake is my brother, but you're the victim here. And I'll be damned if I let him destroy another woman's life just because I was too cowardly to speak up." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what we were planning settling between us. "He's going to be furious when he finds out you're helping me," I said finally. Meredith's smile was grim. "Let him be furious. I've spent too many years making excuses for Blake's behavior, telling myself that his problems were just stress or immaturity or bad luck. But the truth is he's become someone dangerous. Someone who hurts people and then blames them for being hurt." She stood up, gathering her coat and purse. "I'll send you copies of the recordings tonight," she said. "And I'll start reaching out to other people who might have information. College friends, former colleagues, anyone who might have seen signs of this pattern." "Meredith," I said as she turned to leave. "Thank you. For believing me. For helping me. For seeing me." Her eyes filled with tears again. "I should have seen you sooner," she said. "I should have protected you when I had the chance. But I'm going to make sure Blake never gets the chance to hurt anyone else the way he hurt you." After she left, I sat in the cafe for a long time, processing everything that had just happened. Blake's own sister was now working against him. His company was investigating him for a pattern of behavior, not just my isolated complaint. There were recordings of him revealing his true nature, witnesses who had seen the signs of abuse. The web I'd started weaving that morning was becoming stronger, more complex, more inescapable. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. I pulled out my phone and began typing a new email. This one was going to Rebecca, Blake's college girlfriend. Meredith might not have been able to find her, but I had resources she didn't. I had motivation she couldn't match. And I had a feeling that Rebecca had been waiting years for someone to ask her the right questions. Blake Hernandez thought he could destroy women and walk away unscathed. He thought his victims would stay silent, stay broken, stay hidden. He was about to learn how wrong he was. 3 days later, Blake's world began to collapse in earnest. I woke up in my hotel room to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages, not from Blake this time, but from numbers I didn't recognize. Word was spreading faster than I'd anticipated and people were choosing sides. The first call I returned was from Catherine Walsh at Hartwell & Associates. "Miss Sebastian," she said, her voice professional but warm. "Thank you for taking my call. I wanted to update you on our investigation into Mr. Hernandez's conduct." I sat up straighter, my heart racing. "Of course. Based on your complaint and several others that have come to light, we've decided to terminate Mr. Hernandez's employment effective immediately. We've also reported our findings to the appropriate authorities, as some of the allegations suggest criminal behavior." Criminal behavior. The word sent a chill through me but also a surge of satisfaction. Blake was finally facing real consequences. "I want you to know," Catherine continued, "that your courage in coming forward has given other women the strength to speak up. Without your initial complaint, we might never have uncovered the full scope of Mr. Hernandez's misconduct." Other women. Plural. Blake had been busy. "Can you tell me anything about the other complaints?" I asked. "I can't share details, but I can tell you that they paint a consistent picture of a man who uses his position and charm to manipulate and control women. Your experience, unfortunately, was not unique." After we hung up, I sat in stunned silence. I'd known intellectually that Blake probably had other victims, but hearing it confirmed was different. It made his treatment of me feel less personal and more calculated. He hadn't broken me down because I was weak or flawed, but because that's what he did. It was his pattern, his method, his choice. The second call was from Detective Maria Santos with the NYPD's Special Victims Unit. "Miss Sebastian, I understand you've made allegations against Blake Hernandez regarding domestic violence and psychological abuse. I'd like to schedule a time to speak with you about pressing formal charges." Formal charges. The words made my hands shake, but not with fear, with anticipation. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I'd like that very much." We scheduled a meeting for the following day, and Detective Santos mentioned that they'd already received similar complaints from 2 other women. Blake's house of cards was falling faster than even I had hoped. But the most satisfying call came from an unknown number with a California area code. "Is this Aria Sebastian?" The voice was soft, hesitant, but there was something familiar about it. "Yes, this is Aria. My name is Rebecca Martinez. I used to be Rebecca Walsh, but I changed my name after college. I got your email." My heart stopped. Blake's college girlfriend, the one who had disappeared so completely that even his sister couldn't find her. "Rebecca," I breathed. "Thank you for calling. I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," she admitted. "I've spent 8 years trying to forget Blake Hernandez ever existed. But when I read your email, when I saw that he'd done to you what he did to me..." Her voice broke slightly. I couldn't stay silent anymore. We talked for 2 hours. Rebecca's story was heartbreakingly similar to mine. The gradual erosion of her confidence, the constant criticism disguised as concern, the isolation from friends and family, the escalating control and eventual violence. "He broke my arm," she said quietly. "Claimed it was an accident, that I'd fallen down the stairs. But I knew he'd pushed me, and I knew that if I stayed it would only get worse." "Why didn't you report it?" I asked gently. "Because I was 21 and terrified and convinced it was somehow my fault," she said. "Because he was charming and popular and came from a good family, and I was just some scholarship kid from the wrong side of town. Who would have believed me?" "I believe you," I said. "And I think a lot of other people will too." Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. "You really think we can stop him?" "I think we already are stopping him," I said. "He's lost his job, he's under criminal investigation, and his reputation is in ruins. But more importantly, we're making sure everyone knows what he really is. The next woman he tries to charm won't be going in blind." "I want to help," Rebecca said suddenly. "I want to testify or give a statement or whatever you need. I've been hiding for 8 years, but I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of letting him win." By the end of the week, Blake's situation had gone from bad to catastrophic. The story had been picked up by a local news blog that specialized in exposing powerful men who abused women. The headline read, "Investment firm fires employee after multiple domestic violence allegations." The article was carefully written to avoid libel, but it painted a clear picture of a man whose professional success had masked a pattern of personal cruelty. It mentioned that multiple women had come forward, that criminal charges were being considered, and that the investigation was ongoing. Blake's LinkedIn profile disappeared. His Instagram went private. His Facebook account was deactivated entirely. But the most devastating blow came from an unexpected source: his own parents. I was having coffee with Meredith when she got the call from her mother. "Mom," Meredith answered, putting the phone on speaker at my nod. "What's wrong?" "We've asked Blake to leave the house," Linda Hernandez said, her voice heavy with exhaustion. We can't have him here anymore. Not after what we've learned." "What do you mean?" Meredith asked, though I could see in her eyes that she already knew. "We hired a private investigator," Linda said. "After Aria told me what Blake had done to her, we needed to know the truth. We needed to know if our son was really capable of." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "And there have been others, Meredith. Not just Rebecca and Aria. At least 3 other women over the years, maybe more. The investigator found police reports that were never filed, hospital records with suspicious explanations, restraining orders that were dropped after Blake's lawyers got involved." I felt sick. 5 women, possibly more. Blake had been systematically destroying lives for nearly a decade, and he'd been getting away with it because his victims were too scared, too isolated, or too broken to fight back. "We've also discovered some financial irregularities," Linda continued. "Money missing from accounts, credit cards opened in other people's names. Blake hasn't just been abusing women, he's been stealing from them. Financial abuse. Another layer to Blake's pattern of control that I hadn't even considered. But it made perfect sense. Isolate your victim emotionally, then make them financially dependent so they can't leave." "We're cutting him off completely," Linda said, her voice growing stronger. "No more money, no more support, no more excuses. We've also decided to establish a foundation in Aria's honor, and Rebecca's and all the other women whose names we may never know. We're going to fund domestic violence shelters and legal aid for abuse survivors." I felt tears streaming down my face. Blake's own parents were not only holding him accountable, they were actively working to help his victims and prevent future abuse. "Mom," Meredith said softly, "I'm proud of you. I know this can't be easy." "It's not," Linda admitted. "But it's necessary. We failed those women by raising a son who could do such things. The least we can do now is try to make amends." After the call ended, Meredith and I sat in silence for a long time. "He's completely alone now," she said finally. "No job, no family support, no friends who will associate with him. His reputation is destroyed, he's facing criminal charges, and everyone he's ever hurt is finally speaking up." "Good," I said, and I meant it. "He deserves to feel as isolated and powerless as he made all of us feel." But even as I said it, I knew this wasn't really about revenge anymore. It had become something bigger. A reckoning not just for Blake but for a system that had allowed him to operate unchecked for so long. The final piece of the puzzle came together the following Monday, when Detective Santos called with an update. "We've arrested Blake Hernandez," she said without preamble. "Multiple charges including assault, battery, stalking, and financial fraud. Bail has been set at $500,000. "Will he make bail?" I asked. "Unlikely. His assets have been frozen pending the financial investigation, and his family has made it clear they won't be posting bond. He'll be staying in custody until trial." Blake Hernandez, who had once seemed so powerful, so untouchable, was sitting in a jail cell. The man who had made me feel small and worthless and afraid was now the one who was powerless. But the most satisfying moment came 3 days later, when I received a letter forwarded from my old address. Blake had written to me from jail. "Aria, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need you to understand something. I never meant for things to go this far. I never meant to hurt you the way I did. I've been doing a lot of thinking in here, and I realize now that I was sick. The pressure, the stress, the need to control everything. It made me into someone I didn't recognize. Someone I hate. I know I can't undo what I did to you, to Rebecca, to the others. I know I can't take back the pain I caused or the damage I did. But I want you to know that I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to visit me or write back or give me another chance. I just need you to know that you were right to leave. You were right to speak up. You were right to make sure I faced consequences. You saved yourself, and you probably saved other women too. You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for, and I'm sorry it took me losing everything to see that. I hope you can find peace. I hope you can heal. I hope you can become the woman you were before I broke you down. I'm sorry, Blake. I read the letter 3 times, looking for signs of manipulation, for hidden threats or attempts to make me feel guilty. But all I found was what seemed like genuine remorse and acknowledgement of responsibility. It didn't change anything. It didn't undo the months of abuse or erase the trauma he'd caused. But it did give me something I hadn't expected: closure. Blake Hernandez finally understood what he'd done. He finally saw me as a person rather than an object to be controlled. And he finally faced the consequences of his choices. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my desk drawer. Not because I wanted to keep it as a memento, but because it was evidence of something important. Abusers could change, could recognize their behavior, could take responsibility for their actions. It was too late for Blake and me. Too late for Blake and Rebecca and all the other women whose lives he'd damaged. But maybe if he truly meant what he'd written, it wasn't too late for him to become someone different. Someone who would never hurt another woman again. 6 months later, I stood in the bathroom of my new apartment, looking at my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was someone I barely recognized. Not because she was broken or diminished, but because she was stronger than I'd ever imagined possible. My hair was shorter now, cut in a style that made me feel confident and professional. My eyes were clear and bright, no longer clouded with fear or self-doubt. The bruises had long since faded, but more importantly, so had the invisible wounds that had taken so much longer to heal. The apartment was mine. Truly mine. I'd paid for it with money from the settlement Blake's family had insisted on providing, despite my initial reluctance to accept it. Linda Hernandez had been adamant that it was the least they could do, and I'd finally agreed when I realized the money could help me rebuild my life completely. It was a small 1-bedroom in Brooklyn with exposed brick walls and large windows that let in streams of golden sunlight. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, every detail had been chosen by me for me. No one else's opinions or preferences had influenced my decisions. For the first time in years, I was living in a space that reflected who I actually was. My phone buzzed with a text from Luna. "Ready for tonight? I'm so proud of you." Tonight was the launch of the Linda Hernandez Foundation for Domestic Violence Survivors, the organization Blake's parents had established in honor of his victims. I'd been asked to speak at the inaugural fundraising dinner, to share my story and help raise awareness about the subtle signs of abuse that so many people missed. The old Aria would have been terrified at the thought of speaking publicly about such personal trauma. But this Aria, the one who had found her voice again, who had learned to trust her own perceptions, who had discovered that she was far stronger than anyone had given her credit for, was looking forward to it. I'd spent months in therapy, working with Dr. Jennifer Walsh, no relation to Blake's college girlfriend, despite the shared name, to untangle the psychological damage Blake had inflicted. It had been hard work, harder than anything I'd ever done, but it had been worth it. Trauma doesn't define you, Dr. Walsh had told me during one of our early sessions. How you respond to it, how you heal from it, how you use it to help others, that's what defines you. And I was defining myself now, not as Blake's victim, but as a survivor who had found the strength to fight back. The criminal trial had been difficult but ultimately satisfying. Blake had pled guilty to multiple charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. 5 years in prison followed by mandatory counseling and a permanent restraining order against contacting any of his victims. Rebecca had flown in from California to testify, and seeing her in person had been both heartbreaking and inspiring. She was still fragile in some ways, still dealing with the long-term effects of Blake's abuse, but she was also fierce and determined. We'd become friends, bonding over our shared experience and our commitment to making sure Blake never hurt anyone else. "He stole years from us," Rebecca had said after the sentencing, "but he doesn't get to steal our futures." The other women who had come forward, 3 more just as Linda Hernandez had discovered, had also found their voices. We'd formed an informal support group, meeting monthly to check in on each other and share resources for healing. It was strange how something so terrible had led to something so meaningful. Blake's abuse had isolated each of us, made us feel alone and ashamed. But speaking up about it had connected us in ways that were profound and lasting. I checked my watch and realized it was time to get ready for the dinner. I'd chosen a dress that made me feel powerful, deep blue silk that brought out my eyes, with a cut that was elegant but not revealing. I'd learned to dress for myself again, to choose clothes that made me feel confident rather than trying to anticipate someone else's approval. As I was putting on my earrings, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something about it seemed familiar. Hello. I answered cautiously. Arya? This is Marcus Jones, Blake's old roommate from college. I hope you don't mind me calling. I remembered Marcus. He'd seemed like a decent guy during the few times I'd met him, and I'd reached out to him months ago as part of my campaign to expose Blake's true nature. Of course not, I said. How are you? I'm good, thanks. I'm actually calling because I wanted you to know something. About Blake and about what you did. I waited, not sure where this was going. After everything came out, after the arrest and the trial, I started thinking about things I'd seen over the years. Things I'd dismissed or ignored because Blake was my friend and I didn't want to believe he was capable of. Marcus paused. Well, of what he was capable of. What kind of things? The way he talked about women. The way he described his relationships. I always thought he was just being a typical guy, you know? Complaining about girlfriends, making jokes that were maybe a little mean but not serious. But looking back, I can see that it was more than that. It was a pattern of disrespect and control that I should have recognized. Marcus's voice was heavy with regret. I should have said something. I should have called him out when he made those comments, or asked more questions when his girlfriend seemed to change so dramatically. I should have been a better friend to you and to Rebecca and to all the others. Marcus, I said gently, you couldn't have known. But I could have, he interrupted. That's the thing. The signs were there. I just chose not to see them because it was easier to believe that Blake was a good guy who sometimes said stupid things than to confront the possibility that my friend was an abuser. He was quiet for a moment, then continued. I wanted to call because I'm starting a group for men who want to learn how to recognize and interrupt abusive behavior. Men who want to be better allies, better friends, better human beings. And I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to speak to us sometime. To help us understand what we should be looking for, what we should be doing differently. The request surprised me, but it also filled me with hope. Change didn't just have to come from survivors speaking up. It could come from bystanders learning to see and act. I'd be honored to speak to your group, I said. Thank you for doing this work, Marcus. Thank you for being willing to look at your own behavior and change it. Thank you for being brave enough to speak up, he replied. You saved lives, Arya. You know that, right? Not just your own, but the lives of women Blake would have hurt in the future. After we hung up, I sat for a moment, absorbing his words. I had saved lives. By refusing to stay silent, by refusing to accept Blake's version of reality, by fighting back with everything I had, I'd prevented other women from going through what I'd experienced. It was a responsibility I didn't take lightly, but it was also a source of strength. My pain had purpose now. My trauma had been transformed into something that could help others. I finished getting ready and called a cab to take me to the hotel where the foundation dinner was being held. As the city lights blurred past the window, I thought about the speech I was going to give, about the story I was going to tell. It wasn't a story about being a victim. It was a story about finding the strength to fight back, about refusing to let someone else's cruelty define your worth, about the power of speaking truth even when it's difficult and dangerous. It was a story about transformation, not just my own, but the transformation that was possible when people chose courage over comfort, truth over convenience, justice over silence. The hotel ballroom was filled with people who had come to support the Foundation's mission. I saw familiar faces. Meredith and her parents, Rebecca and her new boyfriend, Dr. Walsh and several other therapists who worked with abuse survivors, Detective Santos and other law enforcement officials who specialized in domestic violence cases. But I also saw strangers. People who had been touched by stories like mine, who wanted to be part of the solution, who believed that change was possible. When it was time for my speech, I walked to the podium with steady steps and a clear voice. I looked out at the audience and saw not judgment or pity, but respect and hope. My name is Arya Sebastian, I began, And I'm here tonight not as a victim but as a survivor. I'm here to tell you that abuse doesn't always look like what you think it does. It doesn't always leave visible scars or obvious signs. Sometimes it's subtle, gradual, almost invisible until it's too late. I told them about Blake, about the slow erosion of my confidence, about the way love had been weaponized against me. I told them about the voice memo that had changed everything, about the choice I'd made to fight back instead of disappearing quietly. I could have left silently, I said. I could have taken my broken pieces and tried to put them back together in private. Many women do, and there's no shame in that choice. But I realized that my silence would be Blake's protection. My shame would be his shield. And I refused to give him that gift. I talked about the investigation, the trial, the other women who had found their voices. I talked about the importance of believing survivors, of holding abusers accountable, of creating systems that supported healing rather than perpetuating harm. Blake Hernandez is in prison tonight, I said, not because I was vindictive or cruel, but because actions have consequences. Because abuse is a choice, and people who make that choice should face the results of their decisions. I paused, looking out at the faces in the audience, seeing tears and nods and expressions of determination. But this story isn't really about Blake, I continued. It's about all of us. It's about the choice we make when we see someone being hurt. Do we look away or do we act? It's about the choice we make when someone tells us they're being abused. Do we doubt them or do we believe them? It's about the choice we make when we have the power to create change. Do we stay comfortable or do we do what's right? I talked about the foundation, about the work that still needed to be done, about the women who were still trapped in situations like the one I'd escaped. Every dollar raised tonight will go toward helping someone find their voice, I said. Every program we fund will give someone the tools they need to rebuild their life. Every shelter we support will provide safety for someone who thought they had nowhere to go. As I concluded my speech, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete and total confidence in who I was and what I was doing. I am not the same woman who lived in fear for months, I said. I am not the broken, pathetic creature Blake Hernandez tried to create. I am someone who learned that strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up, speaking your truth, and refusing to let anyone else's cruelty define your worth. The applause was thunderous, but more importantly, it was genuine. People weren't clapping out of pity or politeness. They were clapping because they'd been moved, inspired, motivated to action. After the dinner, as I was gathering my things to leave, a young woman approached me. She looked to be in her early 20s, with dark circles under her eyes and a nervous energy that I recognized immediately. "Miss Sebastian," she said quietly, "I'm sorry to bother you, but I wanted to thank you for your speech. For everything you've done." "You're not bothering me at all," I said gently. "What's your name?" "Sarah," she said. "And I think I might be in a situation like yours was. With my boyfriend. I've been making excuses for him, telling myself it's not that bad, but listening to you tonight." She trailed off, tears filling her eyes. "It is that bad, isn't it?" she whispered. "When someone makes you feel like you're crazy for having feelings, when they control what you wear and who you see, when they make you apologize for things that aren't your fault. That's not normal, is it?" "No," I said firmly. "It's not normal and it's not your fault, and you deserve so much better." I spent the next hour talking with Sarah, giving her resources, helping her make a safety plan, connecting her with people who could help. As I watched her walk away with Dr. Walsh's business card and the number for a local shelter, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing your pain has been transformed into purpose. This was why I'd fought back. Not just for myself, but for Sarah and all the other women who needed to know they weren't alone, weren't crazy, weren't worthless. Blake Hernandez had tried to destroy me, but instead he'd created something he never could have imagined. A woman who was unbreakable, unsilenceable, and absolutely committed to making sure no one else suffered the way I had.